Thank you again for the opportunity for our department to share with you information from a comprehensive analysis regarding our first year of body-worn cameras. And currently, we have 871 cameras on our uniformed police officers at all of our area commands. Now, information is important, but equally important is having all the information to make an informed opinion, not somebody else's opinion in a 30-second soundbite or a 140-character tweet or a Facebook post. Social media has changed our world, both in a good way and maybe not so good. For many, it isn't about getting the information out first, or it's not about getting the correct information out, it's about getting the information out first. The Declaration of Independence is an amazing and wonderful document. It governs our great nation and has stood the test of time for more than 200 years. We are a country of laws and fundamental rights, rights that are guaranteed under our Constitution, that all of our police officers took an oath to uphold. That oath said that we will bear true faith and allegiance to our Constitution. And to all of us, this oath is not just mere words on a piece of paper. This oath comes with great responsibilities. The responsibility to protect everyone's rights, our citizens, who we so proudly serve, and our police officers. Police officers are held to a higher standard, and we should be held to that higher standard. Technology has changed the way we live and connect in our world. It has changed the way that we as police officers perform our duties. In many cases, it has made us more efficient and more effective. One such area is body-worn cameras, and we are a huge proponent of body-worn cameras. This report will focus on our first 3 divisions that began using body-worn cameras. Those divisions are Central, Southeastern, and Mid-City divisions, some of our most diverse divisions within our city. And unless otherwise indicated, the time frame used for comparison is from July 1st, 2013 to June 30th, 2014, compared to July 1st, 2014 to June 30th, 2015. The topics we'll cover are internal affairs complaints, use of force, mental health calls for service, aggravated assaults, Proposition 47 bookings, and assaults on police officers. Also very important about our analysis is to remind everyone, this is just the first year of data, and only at 3 of our commands. And we did not compare the data to a control group. So I caution everyone about the definitive conclusions, but we wanted to share this information after our first year of body-worn cameras at these 3 divisions. And we found the information very interesting. If you take a look at this slide, this is citizen complaints. We saw a 23% decrease in citizen complaints and a 44% decrease in allegations. Now let me take a moment to explain the difference between a complaint and an allegation. One complaint could have many allegations, such as the citizen may say that the officer was rude. That could be a courtesy allegation. Also contained in that complaint may be that the officer towed my car. That could be a procedural allegation, and maybe the complainant might say the officer took me to the ground, and that might be a force allegation. So as you can see, there could be several different allegations contained within each of the complaints. Now, each allegation can have 4 different findings. The findings could either be sustained, meaning that the allegation occurred and that the officer violated some policy or procedure. Exonerated means that the allegation occurred, but that the actions of the officer were legal, proper, or justified. Unfounded means that the allegation did not occur, and not sustained means that there wasn't enough evidence to make a determination of that allegation. That is basically your he said, she said category. And in that category of not sustained, as you see, we saw an 84% decrease, meaning in this category which an 84% decrease of the he said, she said is very significant. This shows that body-worn cameras, video evidence, has reduced the ambiguity within allegations. And those definitive findings now of the not sustained were made in all categories. Some of them were sustained allegations, some of them were exonerated allegations, and some of them were unfounded allegations. So the reduction of not sustained complaints are a win-win for everyone, for our community and for our police officers. Now also, our independent Citizens Review Board on Police Practices, they have also had positive feedback regarding this additional piece of evidence from the body-worn camera, which has assisted them in their very important work and oversight regarding our police department's internal affairs investigations. Additionally, our police officers' feedback is that the cameras help to de-escalate situations. So this next slide talks about use of force. Let me give you some background on use of force. Citywide, we get on average about 1.3 million calls into our communication center every year. We come in contact with millions of people each year. And last year, citywide, now this is citywide, not just at the divisions, but citywide, we responded to more than 562,000 incidents. This statistically means that citywide, in less than 1% of those incidents, force was used. Now, taking a look at our 3 divisions, we conducted an analysis on the use of force. We looked at the number of lesser controlling force options and greater controlling force options, where an officer made some type of physical contact with an individual, either by hands or another force option from a distance, maybe by a taser or a chemical agent. Let me explain the difference in lesser force options and greater force options. A lesser force option could be in response, let's say, as an example, a person who is passively resisting. And an example of this would be, let's say an individual is under arrest and the officer has asked the individual to place their hands behind their back. The suspect is not pulling away, but they're also not complying by putting their hands behind their back. And the officer has to go and make contact and use some type of force in order to move the hands from the front, wherever they are, behind the back. That would be a minimal amount of force, just basically physical strength by moving from one area to another area. Now, a greater type of controlling or defending force option would be, let's say that the subject in this particular case refused to put their hands behind their back, but actively pulled away or did something such as pushing the officer, did something that the officer need to use some type of greater controlling force in order to take that suspect into custody. Now, if you look at this slide shows that we saw an 8% decrease in greater controlling force and a 17% increase in our lesser or minimal use of force. And overall, the force instances increased by 10%. I want to make sure that everybody understands in this graph that the total force category over here, we're not talking about total incidents. We're not talking about incidents. We're talking about instances. And as I discussed during the citizens' complaint slide, that you could have one complaint but many different allegations, it's the same for this. You can have one incident but many different force instances. And as an example, let's say an individual is not complying. Officer walks up and tries to put the individual's hands behind their back. That would be one force incident. But what happens is, let's say the individual pulls away. The officer then has to do a control hold. That's a second type of incident. And then let's say the suspect does something else and the officer has to then use greater controlling force and take the suspect to the ground. That would be a third instance on that one incident. So to summarize what this means also is that, one more thing too, is that that's one officer. If other officers are at the scene, they used any force, they would also have to report their own use of force too. So you could also have multiple officers that would have to indicate the force used on each of these incidents. So let me summarize what this slide means. We saw this as an exchange between the two types of force. Essentially, we were able to use lesser force more often to gain compliance and successfully de-escalate incidents from having to use greater controlling force. And although our overall count of force options used increased, our lesser force options were all that were necessary. Now, there could be a variety of factors of why our overall instances of force increased. It could be more accurate reporting by our police officers that are wearing body-worn cameras. But it also could be on how we're training our officers, because we are training to get more resources to the scene to help, again, to de-escalate situations. And with more officers at the scene, as I said before, every time an officer would make contact with that individual, if it's one officer or two officers, so if one officer had to take an arm, another officer had to take an arm, another officer maybe was trying to control them by holding their hands on their shoulders, each of those officers would have to report their use of force, no matter how minimal. So this data suggests that behavior likely improves when you know that you're being recorded. This is a win-win for our police officers and our community. We want everyone to behave better, our police officers and our community. But in this next slide, there was one category, however, where that theory did not appear to apply. And that's where assaults on our police officers were up 36% at these 3 divisions this past year. So the question we asked ourselves, if people are behaving better when they know they're being recorded, then why do we have an increase on assaults on police officers? There's likely not one reason, but maybe several. We know every day that we've seen locally and nationally coverage occurring across our country regarding officers being killed, and I believe it's a statistic now about every 53 hours a police officer is killed in the line of duty. Just a few days ago, the deputy that was killed pumping gas, and just over the last weekend, the Las Vegas police officers that were just stopped at a light that were shot. And this is a huge concern, what's happening across the country, a huge concern, and weighs very heavily on all our police officers being a target just because you do wear a uniform. But we also wanted to know if our analysis could offer any insights or data into other factors. So what we did is that we did some more research, and we looked at the areas, the specific areas where we had the highest number of assaults on officers. And we noticed the following common factors. Those areas, they ranked highest in mental health calls for service. They ranked high for adult narcotic-related bookings prior to Proposition 47. And if you remember, Proposition 47 reduced many narcotic offenses from a felony to a misdemeanor. They ranked high for aggravated assaults, and they had a large entertainment district in the close proximity. So once we saw these common factors, we continued to look further into each of these categories. And this next slide talks about our mental health calls for service. We noticed an 11% increase in our overall mental health calls for service. Now, this was an increase of 823 calls. But instead of just looking at these large numbers, it's important to keep in mind that it's not just a number. It represents a person in crisis. And mental health calls have been on the rise citywide since 2008. This next slide looks at Proposition 47. And we did notice we noticed a 46% decrease in our adult bookings for narcotics-related offenses. That's more than 1,100 fewer bookings than we had the prior year for narcotic offenses. It's important to note on this slide that the time frame used for this data and analysis was comparing November 2013 to July 2014 with November 2014 to July 2015. And this time frame was used because Proposition 47 took effect in November of 2014. Now, with all these fewer bookings, it means those programs that were successful for those individuals arrested and booked for these crimes prior to the passage of Proposition 47, such as drug court, these programs are no longer an incentive to get clean and sober. Our officers, speaking with them, tell us story after story of individuals that they have contacted in possession of narcotics that are no longer booked into jail under this proposition. And many of those individuals have told our officers that they don't have any desire to get clean and sober. They don't have any desire to seek treatment, and there's nothing in this proposition that can force them to do that. The next slide that we looked at was aggravated assaults. Aggravated assaults we saw were up 5%, and although 5% seems maybe insignificant to some people, it means, though, that there were 95 more victims of a violent crime during the past year. Because an aggravated assault means that you were a victim of an assault that involved a weapon, such as a knife or a gun, or that you sustained a serious injury during that assault. So here are the findings that we've been able to look at. There's benefits. There's lots of benefits of this first year of analysis. Officer feedback indicates that body-worn cameras assist with de-escalating some situations. There was less frequent use of greater controlling defending force options by officers, meaning the officer was able to gain control of the situation by using a lesser controlling force, which supports our officers' feedback regarding de-escalation. There was a reduction in complaints and allegations, and a significant reduction in not sustained findings. This additional piece of evidence of a body-worn camera video reduced the ambiguity in the he said, she said situation, allowing for increased opportunity to make a definitive finding, which again is a win-win for everyone, our community and our police officers. But there's also limitations we found. The early one-year data suggests, but we caution, may not be conclusive that body-worn cameras do not seem to have the same positive impact in areas where we have high mental health calls for service, high aggravated assaults, and high adult narcotic-related bookings. We find this interesting data for our first year analysis, and without question, further analysis and data collection will continue as we expand our body-worn camera program. And although these cameras are a huge benefit and has shown success in many areas, this first year of data seems to also suggest that they are not the end-all solutions to social issues. We are going to need to continue to enhance our current strategies that are effective, such as our psychiatric emergency response team. And what this team does is that it partners a mental health clinician with one of our police officers to respond to mental health-related calls for service. Also, expand on our homeless outreach team, who reaches out to offer assistance to our homeless in an effort to get them off the street, into housing, into treatment. And also, our crisis response trained officers who have received additional training recognizing individuals in crisis, just to name a few. But at the same time, we need to look for new ways, along with our community and law enforcement partners, to help address the growing issues surrounding mental illness and drug and alcohol abuse. Before I take any questions, I want to take a moment to share with you a couple of areas that have evolved since we started our body-worn camera program that are very important for me to address. First, the decision not to release body-worn camera video. We realize the need for public trust. We go to great lengths to earn, maintain, and enhance the public trust each and every day. We further understand our public's demand for transparency. The decision not to release body-worn camera video isn't about withholding information or not being transparent. This is about protecting the integrity of our criminal justice system. This is about protecting due process and every citizen's right to a fair and impartial trial and other proceedings. Releasing pieces of evidence without context outside a courtroom or other entity, especially video evidence that will be played over and over again, that can be manipulated, is incredibly prejudicial. We realize that we may disagree with some of you on this issue, and we respect the opinions of those who do not agree with this position. But as Chief of Police, it is my responsibility and it's our department's responsibility to protect the rights of all of our citizens. And I believe in my heart, after thoughtful and careful consideration, we are making the right decision for the right reasons. And the reason, again, is to protect our citizens' due process rights under the Constitution of the United States. Let me expand on this decision, because we already have policies and procedures in place that state that a police officer will not pose a person we have taken into custody for the media. This policy has been in place long before body-worn cameras, and it's there because seeing a person in handcuffs being posed by a police officer can be very prejudicial. We also have a policy and procedure in place that we will not discuss with the media if a person has confessed to a crime. This policy, too, has been in place long before body-worn cameras. And the reason we have this policy is because a confession is extremely prejudicial and could jeopardize our citizens' right to a fair and impartial trial and to other due process. And why do all these policies exist? They exist to protect our citizens' rights. You heard me say during the presentation that our officers have been assaulted at an alarming rate. And there are many videos that show our officers being shot, stabbed, strangled, punched, and just about anything else you can think of. As we as a department, we have not released any of those videos either, because that would be prejudicial against our citizens' right to due process and a fair and impartial trial. This isn't about us versus them. This is about we the people, which happen to be the first three words of the preamble to our Constitution. So our decision not to release video evidence is about the protection of all of our citizens, the rights of everyone, our citizens who we so proudly serve, and our police officers. However, there are many entities that do get to see the video, as well as every other single piece of evidence in our check and balance investigations regarding officer-involved shootings. And we take officer-involved shootings extremely serious, and we know that our public does too, and they should. Let's talk about these different entities, because the videos are released to all of them, along with every other piece of evidence. These entities is our homicide unit, who will conduct a criminal investigation. The district attorney, who conducts an independent investigation to determine if any charges will be filed. Our internal affairs division, who will look for policy and procedure violations. Our citizens' independent review board on police practices. Our shooting review board, who will look at tactics and training. And if it goes to court, the judge, the jury, and anyone present inside that courtroom, or any other legal proceedings. And other videos that may be viewed by our public occur during investigations, such as when a citizen files a citizen's complaint against a police officer. That individual often gets to see that video. Having said this, could there also be exceptions to our policy not to release the video to everyone? Of course there could be, of course. And that would be for public safety of our community, after careful consideration, balancing public safety with the due process rights of that individual. The San Diego Police Department is an outstanding police organization, and our team continues to do incredible work each and every day. But like any organization, there are going to be a small percentage that do not live up to our high ethical and moral standards. And if you think for a second that we have not held these officers accountable, let me tell you this. In the last year, we as a professional organization have terminated 11 individuals, and several others have resigned in lieu of pending termination because they chose not to embrace our culture of excellence. We are our greatest critics, and that is not going to stop, because we will strive every single second of every single day to the words that are written on the doors of our police cars, America's finest. Thank you very much.